Thank you very much, Roy. So as I suggest, it's going to be about shifting left. We're going to dig into what shifting left is, as it's currently defined. We're going to redefine it today as well. Today's the beginning of a new manifesto for what shifting left should be. And we're going to dig into a bit of history about shifting left as well. As the title suggests, I was going to make this a bit light-hearted and M&M focused, but I decided if I've got a soapbox, I'm going to make the most of it. So I pivoted about half an hour after I sent this to Roy, and I thought, okay, I can be serious about this. So in essence, the title came about because I spoke to 3 prospects in a row, and they wanted to shift left, but they didn't actually know what shifting left was. So if someone says to you, this is what I want to do, and all 3 of them said different things they wanted to do, but they defined it as shift left, I think clearly we have a miscommunication somewhere along the line about what shifting left actually is. So what I'll do is I'll anonymously say what their definitions were, and then we'll redefine them as we go on. So a bit about myself, actually, by today's agenda, I'll do some introductions about myself, about Mend.io. Some of you might use Mend, some of you might have heard of Mend. We used to be called White Source. You might have heard of Mend then, and you hopefully still use us if you use us as White Source. And I'll go into what is AppSec. AppSec's got actually a pretty interesting history. It's not often you can say that about the history of something in IT, but it's got a nice illustrious history. It's been around since the 50s, and things have changed a little bit, but the definition shouldn't have changed. It should have stayed the same. Unfortunately, it has. So we're going to go into shift left as well historically. We're going to see where the bridges were, and then we're going to go to shift left 2.0 essentially. We'll do a demonstration as well. There's a 15-minute sort of time for some questions as well, but if there's any questions, just hand up and we can answer them as we go along. I've got to fill in 45 minutes, so please help me. So just a bit about myself. My name's Nick Shamsfard. I'm a sales engineer with Mend. What is a sales engineer, for example? We've got loads of different titles. We do pre-sale engineer, solution architect. I'm essentially getting involved with prospects or customers, people who have application security programs, are looking to have application security programs, and I'm essentially asking the right questions to make sure that they are ready for the journey and they are well equipped to use our tool. It's almost like a farmer buying a Ferrari. It's just not going to work, is it? I'll sell it to you, but it's not going to work. And a little bit about myself. I live in Oxford. You've got to select 3 things. It's where you live, how long you work there, and something random about you. So obviously I live in Oxford. It's about 60 to 90 minutes, depending on traffic and how liberal you take the speed limit. Worked for Mend for over 2 years, so it doesn't feel that long, but the breadth of customers who you meet day in, day out means that probably met over 1,000 people in that period of time. And that is a challenge, and I enjoy a challenge. A little bit about Mend. Like I said, we used to be called White Source. Our product positioning changed a little bit. So we were just SCA, which is software composition analysis. And we then acquired a SaaS product. So marketing thought, great, why don't we change our name from White Source, which was really open source centric, to Mend, which is SCA and SAST, which both sit under that. SAST is proprietary source code scanning, essentially. We were founded in 2011, so we are one of the earlier players in this field. What that means is we have a load of different logos and a lot of people as well who work for us, as well as a lot of customers as well. We've got 1.4 million end users, which surprised me because I didn't think we had that many. In fact, I didn't know how many we had, but I ran the number and I got 1.4 million. So I've got no idea if it's right or if it's wrong, but it's a number I got from Salesforce. So we're going to run with it. And these are some of the logos that we're lucky enough to work with. So what is application security? Does people in here know what AppSec is? I know there's a lot of abbreviations in this industry, but cool. AppSec is short for application security, which generally covers your applications and how secure they are, whether that's open source, whether that's DAST, so dynamic scanning, whether that's mobile application scanning, whether it's SaaS, which is proprietary source code scanning. This triangle will help me explain that. So this was from Capgemini 2011, but it's still relevant today. So I said we do SCA and we do SAST. These are the kind of 2 main pillars that we take care in under AST.
Are you going to explain those terms?
I am, yes, yeah. So I said SAST was proprietary source code scanning. it's only because that abbreviation SAST and SAS I always mix up. So static application security scanning. So if you write an application, let's say in Java or JavaScript, for example, a SAST solution will essentially look for SQL injections, so CWEs, and each individual tool would have its own amount of CWEs, their child CWEs that it covers, and can report on particular vulnerabilities. Software composition analysis is essentially the identification of open source libraries that you have in your application. And then there's a risk management profile that sits around them. So what vulnerabilities they have, what licensing, and then you can have reporting that's based around that. And then you have integrations as well. So where it sits in your development lifecycle as well. And these are the kind of two main pillars today. We've got IAST and DAST as well. These are sort of considered to be AppSec tools that we have as well, and database scanning as well, but that can be covered by software composition analysis as well. Any questions thus far? Cool.
You mentioned CWE.
Common weakness enumeration. You tested me, yeah. That's deep in my head for that one. I do apologise. This industry is full of shortening of terms for some reason, but I'll try my best to explain them. Right. This is that TV program. This is your life, where the guy would hold like a big TV. This is AppSec's life, essentially. Right. Early 2000s, there wasn't really application security. It was all manual. It was all doing code reviews and whatever that process would have looked like for your organization. And it was really just network and firewalls. That's what really was. If you had an application, I hope the firewall was going to protect it. That's what it was. It wasn't until OWASP 2001, 2002 that came around that things really have, they've actually picked up steam. So credit to them. They've started this industry. They've really done a lot here. 2000s to late, well, mid-20s, let's say we're now in. They've done a lot, and they're really to thank or to blame, depending on where you stand. So OWASP is founded, and then we've got the emergence of SAST and DAST. DAST is dynamic application security testing. It's almost like external pen testing, if you like. So basically testing your application from the outside in. And that came out in the mid-2000s. Then we move on to, I guess, it's more awareness as we lead on to 2010. So 2010 is kind of, in my head, the turning period, where we've got integration into your CI/CD, into your pipeline. So we now have a solution that can actually scan all of your applications. Essentially, you can put it in, it can be a part of a process that goes out to build, for example. We're now cooking, essentially. The minute we have that, we can basically run with it. And as time goes on, we kind of look at other aspects. I always find in technology, if you kind of gone as far as you can there technologically, it's always education. So education kind of comes next. You've got emergence of companies like Secure Code Warrior, for example. People doing think pieces, white papers. That's where that comes in, and that's probably where the term holistic comes into it. You want like a top-down view of everything. And as you move on, the late 20s are another interesting time, because you had the boom of the integration into your pipelines, and you've now got smart people working on things saying, okay, we can integrate into your repositories. We can automatically host those scans for you. And that's kind of where we are today. We've moved on a little bit. See, there's a bit of a cycle here. New technology, education, new technology, which is automation, machine learning. That's a hot word. There's probably going to be education that comes in some point in the 20s as well. I was intrigued because shift left is in everyone's white papers. If you go to InfoSec, if you go to a Cloud Expo, for example, even at the back on that table there is a one sheet basically that goes through what shift left is, right? And it's basically a product highlight of what that particular vendor does. So I took, it's like 100 white papers that I could find online. I sacrificed my email address for everyone's greater good. I've had people phoning me non-stop, asking me if I want an AppSec program. No, my email address, you should go into it, you read not the person you want to be calling, but I made a mining cloud out of it. And I honestly thought I would see things like IDE, web browser, but security and CAN seemed a bit weird. I don't know, I went into the documentation as well. I did read it as well, but it seemed to be no real focus on any particular thing, which, I'll be honest, I really couldn't come to a conclusion apart from every single paper had its own kind of agenda and wanted to further its own cause. this is the waterfall model. So pre-2005, 2010, this is the kind of model that AppSec would have gone for. And that's when you started to have CI/CD come in, so the 2015s, and then you have the shift left model. So you're trying to find the vulnerabilities earlier. And that's essentially what shift left is, right? It's you're trying to left in your software development lifecycle. And as you can see here, that kind of shift left means that there's a bit of a gap. A, there's a bit of a gap here, and B, there's a bit of a gap there. Why this couldn't be just a rectangle, I don't know. But so 2017, when I did my research, I started to see that shift left really started to be more focused on IDEs, scanning at that level. And there seemed to be a real lack of attention and nurturing with this side of the development life cycle. And that's probably where the term shift left has been, and that's where probably it's changed. Right? That's the core of it. I just thought that was interesting. That's 2017, so that's not that long ago. It's 6-7 years. So if something's changed definition, that's good going. Love that, guys. So shift left is history. I love research, as you might be able to tell at this point. I like sort of going down a rabbit hole, whether that's Wikipedia and something like that. I did a Google. This is not scientific, but I did a Google on shift left pre-2020. That's the key point. I want to do pre-2020, and these are the top 4 articles that hit. The rest were kind of gobbledygook. They were real articles about anything. They were independent think pieces that didn't really kind of have any hypotheses or any conclusion. I thought it was interesting that out of the top 4, 50% are actually nothing to do with DevOps. In fact, the top hit was shift left, is IT service management, which, I mean, if I'm going to take a conclusion out of that, I think shift left is just a term in the industry, and it probably just gets recycled. So you probably see it somewhere near you at some point.
This is cool.
But that article was actually pretty good. And this was in 2001. So there was a journal, Dr. Dobbs journal. I never heard of it. Apparently someone in San Francisco has got a whole garage full of Dr. Dobbs journals. If anyone's interested, it's on eBay. Yeah, and there was loads on Craigslist as well. So the Larry Smith, who had an article in there in 2001,
Wow.
basically he kind of surmised it really well, right? So it's basically the integration of quality assurance. It's at no particular point. But I thought that was interesting. And then the other two, I mean, this one, JoeTheITGuy.com, he's on something. But we'll leave that for another day. But I thought it was interesting. It's not really a term that has kind of organically come from anywhere. It's just kind of a term. I don't know if we play ping pong in this industry with terms and we just kind of throw it about. Hey, it sticks, great. Let's use it. But I think that's a great start. So anecdote. About 30 minutes after I actually I said to Roy, this is the topic that I want to choose. I had 3 hours of back-to-back calls, and they were all different calls. So one was fresh prospects. They were using another tool. So they already have a program in place. Another one hadn't been using anything. It was kind of exploratory call. And another was actually our own customer. So we're eating our own dog food here. And they all wanted to shift left. That was the core of the conversation, shift left. Shift left meant a different thing to everyone. So the first customer who they had another solution in place, and they wanted to shift left into the IDE. Okay,
Wow.
great. We can offer you a solution, but the most important question is, how are you doing things today? And it turns out they don't even have full coverage of their pipelines, of their applications. Yet they kind of want to move on to the next step. I did push back. You have to push back, especially when you're kind of going down a rabbit hole that is not entirely appropriate. They didn't see a problem with the fact that they weren't actually scanning all their applications, right? So you can't identify risk at a later level. That's going to be a problem at an earlier level. Imagine if a developer's in an IDE, for example, they find a critical CVE with the library and they try and update it, and there's 2 critical CVs. What do? Who do they turn to? So you've now kind of got a clunky workflow that isn't going to ultimately work. So if you haven't got proper coverage at the mass adoption level, which is either your ICD or inside your repository even, the process of shift left is actually going to fall down. It's not going to go left. right? And there's no enforcement as well. That's the key thing, right? The tool in an IDE is always down to the individual to do it. And I can only speak for myself. Anytime I had to patch anything, I did it out of hours. And it bugged the hell out of me because, like you said, well, you've got things to do during the day. You've got a task to meet. It's a non-functional requirement, right? Until I need to obtain a piece of paper that essentially means I mandate, I have to continue business. I'm not going to pay it too much attention. Be honest, that call probably left none the wiser. Moved on to the next person. They wanted to shift left, and their intention was to scan in the IDE. Okay, great. We have a tool just for that. But why? Why is the IDE the focal point? If you're trying to fix things in the IDE, no one says fix everything, otherwise you're never going to push anything out, right? You're going to be in a perpetual state of, oh, there's something else, there's something else. Kind of manage them to persuade them to maybe look at repository scanning, and I will give a demonstration of this at the end of how it should be done. But again, that's probably poor workflow. That's a piecemeal approach as well that you've got. And I guess as these calls are kind of going on, you can see the kind of the patterns that are occurring in organizations, not necessarily in what they're saying, but in what they're thinking and how they're tackling this approach of application security. And our own dog food, the last customer was our own customer, and they wanted to shift left. And again, they didn't have enough coverage at the repository level. So even we could offer them a solution for it, but they weren't using it. But they wanted to shift left. Luckily, we can offer them a solution. We can show them the way. We can say, look, like the real shift left is none of these. We don't want to be stuck in a reactive mode. You want to be sort of tackling the dependencies. There's low hanging fruit in there. Allow the tool to do what it's going to do. But these, I think, are the symptoms of someone who wants to shift left incorrectly, in my opinion, and through my experience. Just out of interest, has anyone heard of shift left? All this, yeah. AppSec or ITSM?
We use it, but what we mean is moving test close to the developers.
Okay.
And it does cover some sort of security, but not specifically focused on security.
Okay, so
It's just testing earlier and fail early.
Okay, so when you're scanning and you find a vulnerability, is there like an action plan that you take?
Yes.
There is.
It cannot go through.
Okay, cool. So you're shifting left 2.0. You're ahead of the game.
I work for police.
Okay,
If
great.
it fails, it fails. You go back.
And I made a speeding joke as well. Great. Okay.
There's a couple more.
Oh, sorry. Go for it.
Sorry, I was just going to ask you, could you define shift left in your words? Because there's a lot of different definitions of shift left.
In essence, I think if you want to do something, I'm not going to stop you. Right, that's your prerogative. However, I see the scars of people, and I see the lessons learned when you think that this is just enough, and I'm going to move on and shift left. There is no value, controversial or not, what I'm about to say, in scanning things early on in your development lifecycle if you're not actually scanning. You have wide coverage.
Yeah, I was going to get to that because I hear a lot of shift left where they don't actually even have a security and AppSec program in place. And I don't know what they're shifting left if they don't have anything already.
Finding an AppSec program is another talk in itself.
The gentleman there just said he's using it as a gateway. I mean, you might have a gateway that says badly managed memory code, use Go. That could be your entry point. Does that fit in your shift left model? So you basically say, we have decided we're not going to have all that vulnerable code in memory at the end of the day.
It depends. So what would happen with our particular tool that's money from reference is that would be graded like a high, medium, or low, for example. And then you as an organization would have to set a policy and say, okay, anything that's medium or higher.
Here's a policy, no bad code in memory. Thank you very much.
Exactly that.
Use Go, etc.
But really the first step is if you don't have a tool and you buy something like this, it's just to scan everything and see what the lay of the land is. You can't define a policy, or in my opinion, you shouldn't define a policy until you actually know what's lurking in there. There are unknown unknowns, and these are what these tools are going to help you solve.
Sorry, there was another hand at the back.
Yeah, I was in the company, I introduced shift left. And the only person who heard about it was someone who was a security IT person, but he wasn't able to get it into the company mindset. And I looked at one of his papers and I'm thinking, no, that's not shift left and how he defined it. So I introduced it as considering security options right at the beginning of a project.
Yeah.
Nice one,
And
isn't
then,
it?
rather than at the right end when after you've deployed.
Mm.
So that. So it's
Yeah.
moving the security considerations earlier on
Yeah.
in any kind of project.
It definitely is a mindset. I find the easiest way to enroll on board, for example, is if you have one or few champions who can take that in internally, because they understand the culture much better than I would do, like for an hour a week, for example. And if they're able to take that and say, okay, like I'm working with a company, an hour a week, get together, go through their challenges. And just this week, we enrolled like 100 projects in 30 minutes. And
Wow.
I got a really nice email thanking me today, which doesn't normally happen. So it was nice to see them basically expand the usage of a tool within half an hour, and they're scanning that. And in my opinion, that's truly shift left, because you can now see where the vulnerabilities are, and you can then start scanning. The life in the ID is a lot easier.
Excellent.
Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for cultural changes. Maybe one day.
Well, another, though they don't call it shift left, is, for example, in some of the certified information security manager certificate of ISACA, for example. They have they call it, when you're designing a project, at the beginning, you consider security considerations and evaluate. They don't use the term shift left, which I understand is more an agile, comes out of an agile manifesto kind of thing, but the process is, to me, well known. And has been done well by good companies.
I think we're seeing a lot more people talking about being secure by design, which I think is
Yes.
what
Yeah.
that is, which is bringing
Partly.
security considerations
Yeah.
before you even begin coding anything. It just as you might, what does the client want? What does security want? They're just considerations that you bring earlier in the process.
Yeah, so there is the whole thing of security as requirements at the beginning of the project.
Yeah.
I think there's a OVAS project for it as well, ASVS, which is a good starting point, something like that.
So I guess so now we're talking about kind of what people do when they're shifting left. Shift left shouldn't be looked at shift left. It should just be looked at proper application security, in my view. I don't like terms that kind of specify certain areas, for example. Just have basically cover the majority of the applications. I always find that saying cover all applications is a bit difficult. There's always some legacy out there, or some organizations say, oh, this is on its way out, it won't be here in a year. I've heard that too many times with the organization I've worked with. Okay, things are there right now in my head, they're there to stay, and the risk is there at this moment, so you should scan it.
Nice.
But the organizations that are successful at application security programs, so go from like the 0 to 100, if you like, they cover the majority of their applications. Yes, it takes a bit of time. Yes, it takes a bit of effort, but it's always worth it, because that's what you want. You want to find the risk that exists in there, whether it's to do with licensing, whether it's to do with vulnerabilities, for example. There's stuff that exists in there, if not today, tomorrow. And if it exists, if it can exist tomorrow, you want to stop the bleed before it gets in there. Automatic enrollment as well. By that I mean a tool that just makes it easy for you. Right, once you've set it, once it's in there, once it's embedded, you don't want to muck around with it. You just want it to be set there for life. I don't know about you. The way I look at it is like the seat in my car. It's set. I'm not moving it for anything. Well, I'm not going to throw an inch out of nowhere. So that's where I look at it. Is just make things easy. Someone in a development team or junior engineer, for example, if they join an organization, shouldn't need to do anything. Shouldn't be part of their onboarding, in my view. Define remediation strategy. Once you've got to a point where you've covered the majority of your applications, you need to sit around and work out what's risk, what's unacceptable risk, and what's acceptable risk. These are they're realities in our world, right? Risk is everywhere. And once you know what's there, whether that's again licensing, vulnerabilities, malicious packages, for example, that's growing one day. Old technology as well, old open source libraries, for example, SQL injections, anything. You want to have a defined remediation strategy. How are we going to tackle this? Are we going to use a tool internally? Are we going to basically have one massive sprint? I don't know. That's but the remediation strategy is the most important part, because it gets you from where you don't want to be necessarily to where you want to be, or where you're comfortable. Is there any questions in the chat? Or no?
Still under more. Or under more now.
Yeah.
I didn't think so.
They're not.
Let me see.
Proactive as well. So I don't know if you has anyone heard of Renovate? Well, it's meant Renovate, but it's a decent product on its own. But what Renovate did, and the founder Reece Arkins, kind of flipped everything on its head. So whereas before you were managing vulnerabilities, and I've said vulnerabilities a lot, you can actually manage the dependency. So by keeping the dependency up to date, you're not in a. Someone used whack-a-mole, and I love it, right? Because it is whack-a-mole, right? It's a new vulnerability. Cool, I've got to hit it. I can't say the amount of times when I worked as an engineer, a new iOS would come out, and I'd have to spend an evening patching everything. Arrange a change request, got to take everything down, for example. Being proactive by beating it to the spot, by managing the dependency rather than the vulnerability, is something that we see people go more and more to, and it helps them, it benefits them. And the good thing is you can use automation as well, when possible with this as well. So, little human interaction. Once something's put in a CI/CD, there's not much human interaction. Once it's in a repository integration, little human interaction. It's a tool that's there. It's all automated. It sits in the background.
Docker Scout.
Yeah, well, that's a good tool. I think that's free as well. So that's for containers. Let's go on the tangent. Container vulnerabilities for me are a bit more tricky, whereas you can update individual vulnerabilities in your application. When it comes to container vulnerabilities, I'm a bit at a loss as to what you do. I've not seen an organization do it well.
It's a black box.
Well, you can get like a slimmer base image, for example. I think they're like bare bones, sort of Ubuntu images that you can take, like we were talking about earlier. But what do? Do you not build it with the
You have the
package?
minimum number of libraries. And you only have a short library.
And if you have vulnerabilities in the libraries,
Tough.
exactly. Acceptable risk is what it is. What it all kind of comes down to.
QNX used to work. When you load the specific libraries.
Basically, just enough what's needed. Yeah. Up to actually.
Minimum library.
But it's not easy,
No, it's time consuming.
and to do it well is really, really hard.
And I've not seen a product automatically do it, as far as I'm aware anyway, on the market. Maybe that's the $1 million idea that someone takes away from here, is a product that does that. I think.
So did you have a question?
Yeah, in real life, it is not practical to upgrade all your dependencies and all your containers. In your state, you got a lot of other third-party applications running. They won't do it. So it's just not practical.
So this is what we're saying, it is really hard.
Yeah.
So you read into prioritization.
Yeah, I mean, you have to shut down the application.
Well, what I mean is you've got to prioritize what's important
Like
based on the risk and based on.
the log for J issue.
You know,
So
Even that's not black and white.
Yeah, it's true.
yeah.
Little human interaction, it just goes hand in hand with automatic enrollment, but essentially it's kind of, you want something that's zero touch, in my eyes anyway, purely because I think sometimes tools can be restrictive in their usage. And little to no reliance is not to not use any IDE tooling, it's to not rely on it. I've not seen a Windows build that people give out that has an IDE on it and it has security tooling in that IDE. It's always your onus to go and download it, as far as I've seen. And that causes a problem with scaling. And if you're relying on it, for example, that's tough. How do you guarantee those users have it without going around and checking their IDs, for example?
It's the scale of the code in it, isn't it?
I mean, you could do things like IDE environments where all developers can code from container, for example, that pre-built. You can do that. But again, little to no, I think, in my opinion,
Well, actually, Linux was going that way. So,
So I think this is a starter for tens, my manifesto for shift left 2.0. Yeah, are there any questions? Anything anyone would like me to go back on in particular?
Can you repeat again the no reliance on the early SDLC?
Yeah, so what the key thing here, and it links back into, so I was at a security conference and a gentleman came up to me and he said, sort of point blank, do you have an IDE plugin? And I said, yes, we do. But why did you ask? Hi, my name's Nick, by the way. I'm very well. Thank you for asking. And his insistence was that he would force his developers to use the IDE tool. He said, well, I'll force them. And that interaction stuck in my head, and I couldn't work out why until I was doing this. And I thought,
H2S.
if you're reliant on something that isn't enforceable, and again, there's issues with workflow, I don't think that's a proper strategy, in my opinion. You have to use all the tools that you have at your disposal, and basically further on down the line, in my opinion, is the best place to ensure there's proper coverage. Doesn't mean don't use the IDE, just means don't be reliant on it as such.
You're saying that people can sort of opt in or out, and therefore it's a weakness.
Yeah.
So that was a concern is you, because it's not mandatory.
Yeah.
So we're not saying it's wrong.
It's definitely not wrong.
No.
It's definitely not wrong.
But you can't force it to happen.
Exactly.
Because people may or may not choose to use it.
Yeah. Okay.
That's good.
So how does men tackle this? Some very nice colours. We've got a few different solutions that kind of we go after, and this fits into the demonstration style. So obviously I said we have SCA, which is the open source portion, SAS, which is the multi-source code, and we have container scanning, and we have Renovate as well. So Renovate is there's a free tier tool as well, which I recommend you also utilize. It's free. There's no catches on it. But there's also an enterprise tool as well that sits in, and what that does is that manages dependencies within enterprise applications, for example. And I'll show you what that looks like in a demonstration. Are there any questions? No. Okay. So cool. Demo time. So I'll show. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you application security in a GitHub repository that I've got. I think it's NodeGoat is the example that I've chosen. Out the way. So this is my fictitious organization that I've got here. I've got a few different flavors of applications. Yeah, you can see that.
So can you just explain the concept of goat if people haven't come across that?
Oh, I don't actually know.
So
The goats there is, yeah.
yeah, so there's this. Do you want to explain it? Liv?
No, you go ahead. You do.
I was just going to say, so there's various libraries of deliberately vulnerable software that you can go and find. So WebGoat is one. There are various other ones around.
WebGoat, NodeGoat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you want to go and see some examples of how not to do it, with some instructions on then what to do to avoid that, these are very useful tools. And if you're trying out a tool that can do code scanning, and you just want to see what will it find, these are really useful tools to play with, libraries rather to play with. Yeah. So things like WebGoat, NodeGoat are they're quite educational.
POA specialities.
Yeah.
They've got in their source folder, they've normally got a folder called like lessons, for example. So if you go into here, there'll be sort of different lessons about the particular vulnerabilities themselves. So
With all the talk on AI, do they rely on particular machine learning tools and
They predate that.
yeah, these are
predate that?
Yeah, these have been around for a long time.
Maintained by community, yeah. It's somewhat probably a little bit behind, I guess. But
maybe they'll bring out like a large language model, and then there inevitably needs to be a bomb for a large language model.
Probably need something similar for that.
Yeah.
How about an obfuscated language model?
just use a Google one.
So in this repository, what we recommend to like people who use MEN, for example, is to use what's called the MEN for GitHub repository integration. Repository integration, as the name suggests, is basically the integration of MEN hosted scanning for your repository. So if I go to that last commit, you can see that I've got three sort of different flavors of checks. One's a code security check, which is the proprietary source code. I've got a license check, and I've got an SCA check. The security check itself is basically the open source component, and then the license check feeds off of that. So it says, these are the libraries you have, and then these are the licenses that are contained with them. The aim is that you're giving near real-time feedback. Anytime a change is made, a commit, go to the code security check as well. You can see what I did last time. I just basically did an import of a Java utility, but you can see here, this is what was introduced last. So you've got the near real-time feedback, and things like this, they're much more scalable because everyone has to use it. So everyone is in GitHub, everyone's using it, and it's a central point, it's a source of truth. So you can see here like a particular weakness that's been found. If you need training as well, that can be in here for everyone. Whereas in the IDE, that wouldn't necessarily be there. But you can see here you've got training, got the rules for the readings on particular weakness type. The benefit, again, if I go to the issues themselves, you can see all the different vulnerabilities of the libraries that have been found in here. This is insecure by design, so there are going to be a lot in here. But a good thing is you can go to, let's say, Spring Boot Starter, for example. You can see whether this is whether it's a direct or transitive. So you might think, well, I've got that particular library because there's a root library in. So again, that's a valuable piece of information that your organization or the development team can know. See what the dependency is, for example, as well. EPSS rating. So basically, this is you're using like an enterprise database that's behind it. We can pull all this information out so you can know what to prioritize in this instance, especially when it comes to EPSS and exploit maturity. Remediation, is that possible? Nice green tick there. Basically means that you can basically have automatic remediation that will aggregate all these little fixes and say, okay, 3.2.0 is the highest version you can go. Although where that falls down is that version is 2.7.1. So that's a major change. So if that breaks something, they'll say, well, it's a major change, it's meant to break something. And that's where dependency management comes into this. So I mentioned Renovate and how that kind of changed the industry. Is that not too much to say? I will say it, that changed the industry because it provided us a different path to go down rather than managing the vulnerability. So I could be playing whack-a-mole here for new sprints. Instead, what I've done is I've told Mend to group what we think is high and very high confidence minor and patch updates into a single PR, and that's what you're going to see here. So if I click into this, what you're going to see is a grouping of libraries, the latest minor or patch version you can go to, and you're going to see some statistics on them. These are taken from the free tier tool. It's over 1 billion Docker pulls that have been done on this. So this is reliable crowdsource information. You can say, okay, the age is 62 days. That's a green rating, so it's not overly new. It's adoption rating. How many need to use this particular version? This one's 14%, although I think that's still a pretty good, decent amount of community that uses that particular version. On the free tier tool, we monitor any unit tests or build tests, for example. So anything 96 and above is a green. And ultimately, you've got confidence rating. High and very high is what I'm after here. Basically, I want to take all this information and say, give me a single PR. And I guess the idea is as long as your unit test, your build tests are advanced enough, this will be a single PR that you merge in one go and you fix a hefty amount of vulnerabilities. So again, you can see this level of compute doesn't happen in an IDE necessarily. By taking advantage of the hosted solution, everyone benefits from this. Right? Anyone who's onboarded into this as a developer who sits in this team is benefiting from this.
So that's like you get 80% or so of the glitches in the system or because people haven't patched the very normal things that OWASP talks about. So this kind of approach deals with that, automates that chunk.
Exactly. Which I think is fairly helpful. It's a benefit of this that I think isn't spoken enough about is if you are on the latest minor version of that particular library and a 0-day comes out, you know what it is you need to do. You're almost avoiding that, although I would say some of these are quite out of date, so take that with a pinch of salt. But again, so
does it take into account long-term releasing?
I give it credit. The free tier tool is amazing. The enterprise tool basically scales. Essentially, what it does, it goes out sideways, so you don't have just one scan going at a time. The enterprise goes out sideways, but it's it's really good. Credit to Mr. Arkins, so it's true. You can see here some checks that are running as well on PRs. These are any PRs as well. It's a license check. So we've not really touched on licensing actually, which is a shame. I will touch on it at the end.
That's also an asset manager.
Yes, yeah. All these open source components have a license. Some licenses are quite restrictive. You have to pay for them, or you can only use them in development, for example. If you kind of go outside of that scope, you have to forfeit your source code if they kind of come. So if you come to sell this particular product, it might not be yours, for example. You said about what this actually fixes. Long and short is by merging this one PR, I'm fixing 25 vulnerabilities or CVEs that I have. However, I am introducing 3. So the value of that is I'm fixing 25, but if I recall correctly, some of these were like 90% EPSS score, which is quite high. So you're fixing a whole bunch, so 25 in this case. And you're fixing the root libraries as well. You're not some of those vulnerabilities were for the transitive libraries, and you can't necessarily fix the transitive. You've got to go to the root, and that's what this benefit gives you. However, again, it's about knowing the risk of what you're going to as well. I'm introducing a critical. I'm introducing 2 highs. I might deem that as an acceptable risk for my organization. And if I move my head ever so slightly, you will see that that is reachable. So the analysis conducted on that basically deems that is actually calling on a vulnerable function in there. So you might know, okay, instead of taking 2, 3, 4 sprints to fix this thing, we're going to merge this. It passes all the tests that we have, the build tests, but this will be an next sprint to fix. Risk management. It's about knowing what's there, and that's what the benefit of this check is.
So far that this is a report, do you have a way where you can, for the more common vulnerabilities, can you automate some fixes from that? You integrate, you plug in something.
Absolutely. So this is called Renovate, but remediate, that's just kind of remediate, is the vulnerability management. I've turned that off because I like to show this off because it looks really cool. It's green and orange. Who doesn't like that? Okay. Let's talk about licensing. I don't have any license vulnerabilities in here, as he says confidently. So I don't have any. I've just been able to look, but licensing is a big problem as well in the open source community, especially as there's libraries of multiple licenses, for example. You need to know which one you're using. There's also in-house licensing as well, and this can report on all of that as well. See, there's checks on the pull request, for example, that are alerting you to any erroneous licenses. So that's all built into it as well. Now, any questions? The last thing is if any of you, hopefully you're interested, in tools to take away and kind of examine, have fun with. For SCA, I recommend Renovate. That's a free tool there. There's also OWASP dependency track. You do need to host it with an on-prem solution, but for what it is, it's actually pretty neat. It does a lot of good things. So as long as you can host it, dependency track is really good. Adast, Zapper Nuclei. So these are OWASP tools themselves. They're really, really good. That's my recommendation to use. SAST, it depends on what language you use. The OWASP has lists for both SCA, DAST, IAST, MAST, you name it. It actually has lists, but for OWASP, for SAST, I would recommend you go onto the OWASP website and find a language-specific one for yourself.
So if you want to hunt those bad memories, resident horrible things,
yep,
you can do it.
Yep, that's C++.
I think it comes from the former head of the DOA operations for the NSA, who developed a lot of that attack code. They basically, now she's on the other side of the fence saying, wouldn't it be good if we did away with those memory poor managers? And it should be on any company today to apply this best practice, because they'll start beating up, and they are going to start doing it under the digital security design, I'm sure.
So something to be careful of, just be wary of. If you're using a SaaS tool, the coverage of it will come from CWEs, so just make sure that CWEs is
So
under.
where I'm going with, if you've got some policies that are clear
Mm.
and you know what languages, and you've used Java, that you want to use, that's a good start. Thank you.
Erasmus is a great tool, so there's a place to start, that's where I'd start. Right, any questions?
Awesome.
Yeah. Just curious, do you ever see companies use like multiple SaaS or SEA tools at the same time? No, for example, Microsoft, they use Mend, but they also own Advanced Security.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, like, maybe they might use both.
I'm sure they do use both at some level. The difficulty is with like advanced security, for example, I struggle to see it as a competitor in the space because it doesn't have, as far as I'm aware, like policy blocks.
No.
It doesn't have a dashboard. So if you're a large enough organization like Microsoft is, how are you going to report on vulnerabilities? Everyone wants to see some value from something, and for some, it's important.
Because different SaaS engines have like different things in different ways. So if you want full coverage, then you might use multiple SaaS tools.
You might do, yeah. I'd only ever see that at like financial institutions, perhaps.
Okay.
But normally there's a saying in this industry, just good enough.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. But the only time I might is like if someone uses SonarQube and they want like a security focused tool as opposed to a code quality tool. That's maybe one time.
I've seen that done.
Yeah.
And in fact, we would recommend that if people are getting value from something like SonarQube for code coverage, then by all means continue to use that. But we wouldn't necessarily consider that to be a security tool in quite the same way as the other ones that are doing perhaps a more thorough job at security analysis. Not that SonarQube's bad, don't get me wrong.
No,
It does a very good job and it will do some security scanning, but the dedicated security tools tend to be better. But that's an example of where you might use the two together. But you're almost wearing different hats. Perhaps you're thinking about using SonarQube more to help with the testing and code quality.
Just out of interest, have you got much deployed where they're teaching software engineers so that they can build in a relatively secure environment and they're taught to use this? Are any of your customers academic?
There is one that comes to mind that does academic
Can you name them?
work. No.
So there's only one place that you know of, presumably in this country, if not globally, applying best practice in this area.
I work in a specific region, so it might be that I work in
Asia Pac,
the Nordics and Benelux, so it's
but in Europe then, and
yeah. I mean, we work with for people. We work with someone who's an educational platform for all ages.
excellent.
So there are different people get to different points when they need these tools.
If we were to generate a list of our customers, there's quite a number who've got university in there.
Okay, I'll
Yes,
take it.
yeah.
But what they are doing with it, we couldn't say. We don't
Teaching it to your standard, that's what I'd ask.
So that's a good point. There's a professional services best practices element that we nurture with customers.
Nice.
So again, you don't want to ever give someone a tool and just say, see you later, see you renewal. You have to maintain that relationship with them and make sure they're using the tool in the correct way. Otherwise,
And as we've seen from Whitehorse,
it's back.
yourselves have improved immensely since we last saw you, so it's a really interesting journey. Thank you for
It's all down to me, that.
Yes, I'd say it's also the nature of the subscription-based industry that we're in. We are very much on the hook to make sure people like and get value out of it. So you know that you're going to get the attention of people like Nick and Luke to help you through.
That's an interesting point, actually. So was that a deliberate decision, do you think?
It's there's various reasons why our industries have moved to subscription. We all live in a subscription-based world.
Well, an outcome is people will want to see that they are continuing to get value.
I think it's done wonders for the software industry for credibility. I've been on the bad side of software vendors in the past where you sold a perpetual license and you run it into the sunset with a pocket full of cash. But as the customer, you're left with this shelfware. That doesn't happen so much these days because we are compelled to make you use it. And again and again and again. So
So you
you're
need to demonstrate value. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even if you were buying a perpetual license as a customer of buying a software product, I would still want to be paying a sensible maintenance fee. Because otherwise, how would I expect, along with all the other customers of that product, that product's going to be keeping up with new trends, new vulnerabilities, or whatever it is, new features. You can't expect that to happen for nothing.
Yes, and big software vendors
Yeah.
like SAP and
Yeah.
made the shift 10, 15 years ago to go subscription.
Yeah.
And then that's just trickled down the industry and everybody's in
Yeah.
the same boat now.
We're all customers of something at one point, and we always would go back to a particular area, like I don't know, John Lewis that has like good customer service, for example. So it's just sorry benefits to it.
I think also we've touched. Nick's been showing us some of the free tools that are
Yeah.
available here. There are open source tools. You've referred to some of the OWASP projects. Those are great as well, because that helps people try things out and learn and get started and start to think about what they really want.
There's a community out there as well
Yeah.
who have used it before and they use it now as well.
Yeah, so I would encourage, if people are just dipping their toe into this area, to go and play with some of the free tools, just to find out what they can do. Nick, we've got a question from a couple of questions come in now, from Mitten. So if I read it out, so he says, it was mentioned that the tool, referring to the MEN tool, I guess, uses an enterprise database. Is this database maintained, and what happens if the source of truth is wrong?
Ooh, okay.
So that's a good question, isn't it?
That's
Yeah.
It's never wrong. No. So database is maintained. So what we do, just the nature of there's new vulnerabilities out every day.
I guess that's what he's referring to.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a sync every 6 hours with the sources. So it's up to date. If there's a new vulnerability, there's automatic push to those the users who have that vulnerability. Source of truth. I mean, the source of truth. I mean, one of them is NVD, for example, but there's multiple sources of truth. So that brings redundancy.
Can you just explain NVD?
It's the National Vulnerability Database. So it's maintained by the United States National Security or Department of Defense, is it?
I think it's NIST, I think, but
Yeah.
yeah. So it's a US list of bad
US
things that can go wrong with the
standards.
code.
But it's sort of the biggest vulnerability database that is out there.
So that's one of your sources of truth.
Well, I can't really relate the others without an NDA, but
So you also had some Salesforce integrations, so they used for training, they were really interesting,
Salesforce.
just on your screen. I was
So
like,
they're one of our customers.
nice.
Yeah. So they
Okay.
so source of
There's another question when you finish.
so the source of truth is wrong. We've got our own R&D team, and what they do is they hunt for threats basically, and they verify threats as well. So if someone says, okay, well, I don't think this is a CVE, there's an internal process for that to basically say, okay, well, actually it is a CVE because of this, or it isn't. It's a false value, for example. So there's still a human element to it as well. It's built in.
And presumably, if one of your customers says it's not detecting something that it should be, or vice versa, they can report that as well.
They can. I've personally been on the end of that when someone has given me a list where a competitor has found more vulnerabilities than we did. And I was up to the early hours in the morning going through the NVD, the versioning, and I like our accuracy, is what I'll say.
It could be false positive or
Yeah.
false
So
negative.
sometimes you get an early notification, it won't be proven yet, it won't be assigned a full history.
Or, I mean, it will just be a GitHub issue that someone's raised. For example, it could be anything. There's a verification that we do in the back end of it that enhances really.
Nice.
But it is right. You get 2 or 3 false positives and you're kind of questioning everything. So the trust is hard to build, but it's very easy to lose. So it's
Were you around for the Log4j journey? Can you say anything about that?
been brought a lot of business because people kind of realised they need to monitor these vulnerabilities in some shape or form. So it was good for awareness, certainly. But I wouldn't say it was a pleasant time for them. I don't think.
I think, customers who were already using tools like Mend were in a pretty good spot to handle Log4j because they could find it. They could at least discover where in their inventory it existed. So they had a head start. That's some case studies of
Fixing it can still be very, very tricky.
You still got to wait for the vendor, haven't you?
It won't be the last.
Yeah.
There'll be another.
Yeah.
It always repeats
Okay,
itself.
I've got another
Yeah.
question from Bruce. So Bruce says, would you expect the pipeline scan or repository scan to be the enforcer or
Ooh.
gatekeeper versus developer introduced vulnerabilities?
So we saw so both, depending on which you use, it could be either. That's a slippery answer, I know. I'd probably recommend a repository scan. Purely because, again, it's why it can be widely enforced, for example, and then that's where the feedback is. So there's no pipeline sort of failing. It gives nice feedback about here's the vulnerability, here's the version that you can go to, again, which is using something that we have, and it'd be like a database, for example, that can tell you what version that particular vulnerability is fixed in. So repo scan all the way. I'll ride that wave.
Okay, I mean, I think both is an okay answer as well.
You can use, if someone says to me what are the benefits, I will say either, both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Bruce, if that answered the question, that's correct. Hopefully that did, but if it didn't, come back with a follow on if you need to. Okay, so that's all we've got online. And yeah, please.
Do cloud providers' security policies encourage a shift left approach to application development, or do they have an opposite effect and breed a sort of complacency that, oh, the cloud security will take care of it, we don't need to worry about it?
That's a good question.
They definitely work on it. It wouldn't exist if they didn't.
I always,
Might be a really naive question. that
No, I
doesn't make
mean-
sense, but are they quite strict on, like, if you're going to deploy an application on the cloud, do you have to pass quite stringent security requirements at all on the cloud?
it depends.
Could they be
on the
doing more?
organisations.
Could they be doing more to
No.
There's-
move the industry in the right direction?
There's a term and it's called scan to scan. There's people who just scan to scan. They're out there. And they just scan. I don't know what the end game is for organisations like that. But they're just scanning. There's vulnerabilities in there. They don't have time to fix it.
In fairness, the last question was, I mean, are you asking about platform as a service, in which case you wouldn't have an expectation? The platform itself has to be good anyway.
Depends what you mean by cloud platform, I suppose. What was in your mind?
In the broadest possible way, just
So,
how it influences the thought processes, because
yeah,
I used to be a systems administrator, but nowadays, and systems administrators would take care of a lot of the security surrounding the deployed platform of the application.
so how I read your,
That's detached. So I just wondered what effect it had on the application development approach, the mindset for security to modern application development.
Depends on what security tooling you have in place. I mean, some of the cloud native tools out there are still quite reactive. Like it needs to be pushed out, for example, so you get the nice fancy dashboard showing you like a neural net of what's talking to what, for example. That's maybe too late. Something's been pushed out. Maybe you want to catch it earlier on, particular vulnerability.
it's an interesting thought
Yeah.
as to how does that affect the psychology.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah,
And generally, application security is different from platform security.
Yeah.
You're expecting SQL injection, memory losses,
correct.
secure strings, and
It depends what we mean by cloud as well.
yeah.
Yeah, because there's different types of cloud, you know, you've got infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and
SAS.
and SaaS and so forth. And at the beginning of while we were waiting for people to gather, we were talking a little bit about how some companies internally have developed what they call platform as a service for their developers to write applications on top of, and using those techniques, they'll be letting the developers work at a much higher level of abstraction. They won't be allowing a developer to be going and spinning up virtual machines or what have you. They'll be letting developers deploy applications using building blocks which are predominantly secured and glued together in a relatively predictable way, which will remove some of those risks. But typically, unless you built something like static application scanning into the pipeline, it won't do that for you automatically. There will be nothing to stop you deploying vulnerable application code unless you built it into the life cycle, the pipeline and so forth. And the cloud platform per se will do that, but the pipeline that you wrap around it can do. And it depends on whether you see all of that as one.
Spoken like a licensed cat herder.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Excellent explanation.
So, okay. Anyone else got any thoughts or
Cat herding.
questions?
Yeah, I thought, one thing you haven't mentioned about shift left is like getting buy-in from all the stakeholders, because in my opinion, if they have people on board with your strategy, you know, when you come to actually enforcing the policy to like say, you've got to fix this high critical on your side, then saying, I don't want to do this, no one's there's no one from above has asked us to do this. So I mean, I try to get buy-in from like CTO, CISO, etc. So that we say, we've got approval from CISO and the CTO to enforce these policies, and well, that's why.
Yeah, the cultural question of this is, I think, the thing that gets swept under the rug, but it's ultimately the most important thing. You can still probably take the right steps and be like a good champion, for example, but if people in your organizations just don't pick it up, it's like the guardrails, and they're no longer there towards this. So I think the cultural stage, and it's difficult. Like it's yeah, I don't know with that. I mean, I always think a champion is useful, like someone who you can work with, and internally is able to then educate others, because that then brings the buy-in, almost like the value, especially for larger organizations with like decentralized teams. Like you might talk to each other, but you both work from home, you rarely see each other, for example, you know, that's always helpful.
Developers will always outnumber security people, so
Yeah.
Oh.
Ratios, yeah.
Yeah, the ratios could be typically very high, like 50 to 1.
yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen 100 to 1 and
More,
So
much more.
how do you
yeah.
combat that?
So therefore, there's only so much you can do.
We also have a security champions guide, so
Yeah.
that's what a lot of companies try to follow.
This is back to the universities again, though. Got to start there.
Yeah. Yes, another question?
I would say, how have you seen infrastructure as code impact the shift left? Like as a parallel thing, is it completely abandoned, or no?
That's a really good point.
It's not abandoned. I think it's probably the next hot topic.
Oh,
In my view, anyway.
only 7 years since Andrew.
Personally, I think so. Infrastructure as code, it's just another bit of software. Yeah. Whether the tools from Mend, I'm not an expert on your tools, so I don't know what your tools do in that area. But
I
it
also
sort of,
got some good tools.
yeah,
So
but it sort of doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Okay, we're not specifically talking about Mend's tools. There are tools out there that can help you with infrastructure as code. It's just another bit of software, and people can define insecure configurations in their infrastructure as code by mistake, deliberately, accidentally, what have you. And if you can help people avoid doing that by scanning the source code for their Terraform or whatever it is, their cloud formation, then that's a good thing to do. And that's all part, to me, that's all part of a shift left journey.
it's the same discipline,
Yes,
basically.
it's exactly the same philosophy. You're just doing it on a definition of some virtual servers or S3 buckets or what have you, and saying, well, have you made that S3 bucket public by accident?
We only call out IAC separately, just so people recognise it. Actually, the technology is the same thing.
Scanning source.
Yeah.
It's a different kind.
No, but it's good to call it out. I think it's good to call it out separately, because you need a different kind of mindset around it. And sometimes people don't actually think about the fact that you might better scan that productively and do something useful with it. So that's good. That's a good question. Yeah, thank you.
Testing infrastructure as code is not as common as application automated testing.
Perhaps that's probably true. Perhaps it's because
Difficult.
source code scanning has perhaps been around for a little bit longer. You know, if you look at some of the, you know, the legacy type products that are out there, and infrastructure as code hasn't been around for as long.
Yeah.
There's some article about HashiCorp's version of Terraform. They argue that you can get better auditable compliance by using infrastructure as code.
Yeah.
I don't know enough.
Yeah, so I think what they're referring to there is you're getting a repeatable event. It might be wrong, but at least it's repeatable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's okay, because what they're saying is if you're using an infrastructure as code principle, then if you then need to like basically blast away all of your server definitions and then rebuild them. If you're rebuilding them automatically, that's a lot more predictable in terms of the outcome than actually getting people to go and do that by, putting CDs into machines and clicking next.
Yeah.
Or even trying to script it plus lots of manual work. So it's the automation is what they're referring to there, and that's part of the DevOps journey is the automation. Okay, I think we should. Yeah, is anybody else got a burning question now for the room? We can always take sort of some things later. Let me just double check we haven't got any other questions on here.
Licensed cat herder.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just wrap up. So thank you very much, Nick, for taking us through that. And thank you for the questions that we've had. That's been really good. It's been good to have questions during the talk, I think, and hopefully that didn't disturb you too much. So we got thank yous there. So thanks for the questions, and hopefully you've learned some takeaways. I certainly have. Do go away and play with some of the free stuff, yeah, both from Mend and OWASP, and there's other people out there who've got some free stuff. And if you're in the room and you've got some time, we're going to have some refreshments afterwards, so you can come and ask Nick and his colleagues a little bit more about shift left and how it works. But thank you very much. Thank you.